When you boil it right down, Honda is all about consistency. Consistency of manufacturing, consistency of performance. You know, these guys know a thing or two about panel gaps. But when it comes to the Civic Type R, they're consistently bonkers. To put it mildly, the Type R has been, across 5 generations, an absolute weapon. It really does fly in the face of the idea that Honda's a conservative manufacturer, obsessed with packaging and practicality over pure performance. When Honda's engineers decide they do want to push the boundaries in the sports car arena, they go to extremes. Now, obviously, the Honda Civic Type R is all about aggression, very much aggressive in the front, but of course this rear end of the car is the real talking point. It's got this huge spoiler assembly, you've got these strakes on the roof, and then you've got this diffuser down the bottom surrounding your triple exhaust. It's all designed to kind of suck the car to the ground and let the air flow through without that turbulence you might get at higher speeds. The cool thing about this spoiler assembly, though, is that when you're sitting up front in the driver's seat, it doesn't restrict your view out the back. You've got this massive spoiler at the top here, but you can't see that because it's above the roof line, and then down here it's completely glass. That enormous wing isn't a new addition for this version. It's acted as a giant billboard for the Type R's street credibility over several generations. At various times in the past, the Type R has appeared as a 4-door sedan in the Japanese domestic market, and it even had its very own shape for the European market as well. The last iteration, which we didn't get here in New Zealand, appearing as a 3-door hatch. Honda never strays too far from the small engine blueprint. Over the last 22 years, its Type R Integra and Civic engines have managed to wring out heaps of horsepower from a very compact powertrain. These are high-revving engines with the sort of ridiculous redline limits you'd expect to see from a superbike rather than a passenger car. And it's worth noting that actually the last iteration of the Type R was the first turbocharged one. Before that, they were naturally aspirated. So the redline that you're achieving on the track is even more impressive. You don't realise until you haven't got a manual gearbox for a while what a joy it is to drive one. Very short throw sort of shift, it's lovely to use. Under the bonnet we've got a 2-litre VTEC turbo, 228 kilowatt engine. So the thing that remains with this 5th generation Type R Civic is just how point and shoot the whole experience is. It's got electric steering, but it feels very mechanical. Just an amazing sort of linear process to the way that it builds speed, builds momentum, so much power right through the rev range, as all those sort of performance Honda engines do. The ones that aren't in F1 anyway. If you've ever driven a Honda S2000 from the 1990s, you might actually find a few little similarities between that car and the Civic Type R. It's not just the sports seats you're sitting in or the way that the steering wheel sits nice and close to your chest with that fantastic 6-speed manual transmission falling to hand, but actually the gauges, the dials. Honda's engineers have really called back to that performance car of old when they're looking at how the instrument binnacle in this car is laid out. Perhaps the Type R's biggest asset, however, is its pure bang-for-buck factor. This is a $60,000 hot hatch, which actually has 228 kilowatts under the bonnet. If you weigh it up against something like the Volkswagen Golf R, it actually has slightly more horsepower, but costs a significant $9,000 less. It's a similar story with the Renault Megane RS, which can only muster 205 kilowatts, but costs around the same amount. Now, I say hot hatch, and the Type R definitely is still a 5-door, but it's fair to say that it's grown immeasurably over the last few generations, as have all Civics. It's now 2.7 metres long and 1.9 metres wide, so it's no insubstantial thing. To compensate for the size of the Type R, Honda's engineers have ensured short front and rear overhangs. This means the car retains excellent weight distribution, and coupled with a low centre of gravity, it really has that sort of wheel in each corner go-kart feel when you're on a nice piece of twisty tarmac. The Civic Type R received numerous awards as soon as it was released. In fact, it topped various best-of polls for that year. It also became a bit of an instant track hero. It became the fastest front-wheel drive car around the famous Nürburgring in Germany. Kind of appropriate then that the car we've got today is painted in championship white. Now, I've been talking a lot about Honda's pedigree, but even in the last few years, the company really has ramped up its efforts in the sports car arena. You only have to look at both the 1990 and the 2016 versions of the iconic NSX to see what the same company that makes the Jazz city car can do when it's had its morning coffee. In fact, the latest edition of the NSX sees it recast as a V6 hybrid supercar. And then, of course, a couple of years ago at the Frankfurt Motor Show, they totally surprised everybody with the urban EV concept, this diminutive little electric car that harks back to the original 1970s Honda Civic. And of course there's this, the Type R, which remains an incredible performance car as it has for several generations. I think all told, Honda's got their mojo back. And a consistent, reliable manufacturer such as Honda rocking its sports car mojo, well, all I can say is the future looks bonkers, but in a good way.